South Wales, Australia. Friends and family have gathered together for the Western-themed wedding of Steve Maxwell and Nadia Allen. So far, the prelude is like something out of a movie. Finally,
She's coming.
Is she?
Yep, on the road.
here comes the bride. Nadia, her bridesmaids, and the man giving her away, her grandfather, are to be dropped at the altar by horse and carriage.
It was, a magical moment, them coming up the driveway.
Unfortunately, this Old West wedding is about to go south.
Suddenly the horses stopped. I thought, that's a bit odd. Why are they stopping?
A light drizzle has left the steep driveway wet. The animals can't get traction and start to slip. There's no recovery. The cart tips and the wedding party goes flying. Then, a wedding day miracle. Nadia emerges as though it never happened.
Pronounce you to be husband and wife.
The rest of the wedding goes off perfectly.
Hey, good morning, GMP. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, if you're joining us for the first time or first time in a while, and we haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Garry. I am one of the pastors here. So glad that you have decided to spend some of your day with us this morning as we continue on in this series that Russ mentioned that we're in called Who. But before we get started, I just wanted to bring you up to date on a couple of things. The first is back in December, or the end of November really, we were introduced and with the opportunity to partner with Compassion Canada. And long story short, we set a goal to raise $20,000 to help a church in Chiapas, Mexico, so they could buy the needed supplies for their community, food and medical supplies and things like that. So we set a goal, $20,000 to raise between December 1st and May 2021. And I am so proud to say that as of today, you guys, your generosity, you just poured it out, and we have raised $19,250. We got $750 to go, and it's February. So way to go, TMP. If you want to know more about that project, go to themeetingplace.org, scroll down, click on Compassion Project, and you can read all about it. And if you want to make a donation, help us make that last $750, you'll see a button that you can do that there as well. And one last thing, if you're on our newsletter list, you would have received an email on Thursday from me on a new initiative that we're starting this month, and it's going to run for the month of January, called Blanket Nanaimo. What we're doing is we're asking if you have any old blankets, sleeping bags, socks, gloves, hats, outerwear of any kind that you aren't using anymore, to donate those. We're partnering with 3 different organizations in town. The Nanaimo Aboriginal Center, the Wisteria Organization, some of you may know them as the Stone Soup Kitchen, and SIA, which stands for the Society for Equity, Inclusion, and Advocacy. And what they're doing is they're collecting all of these items so they can distribute it to those that are on the street to keep them warm, and especially with this cold weather that we've got coming this week. So if you have any of that stuff, you can deliver it to the address that's on your screen, or again, go to themeetingplace.org and scroll down, and just above the Compassion Project, you'll see Blanket Nanaimo, and it'll tell you everything you need to know. But thank you in advance. I know you guys are going to show up in a big way. I know stuff is already starting to trickle in. All right, so weddings. Weddings are, man, they are an accident waiting to happen, as we saw in that opening video, right? And there was no horses harmed in the filming of that wedding. Okay, just so you know that. But it's true, isn't it? I've been involved in many weddings, either as, just attending it or officiating it. And there is a reason why America's Funniest Home Videos and YouTube are chock full of wedding disaster videos, because things happen at weddings. Now, one of the things I get to do as a pastor, I absolutely love. This is probably next to doing what I'm doing right now, this is probably one of the things I love to do the most. And that is come alongside a couple that has decided to get married. And one of the things that we talk about is the wedding day, because it's a big thing. It's a big day, but I always remind them it's one day out of hopefully thousands of marriage days to follow. And so although it's important, I try and lower their expectations, so if something does kind of go awry, they're not all stressed out about it and freaking out. So, because it doesn't matter how much planning you do, how many details you take care of, there are just too many moving parts in a wedding to think it's going to go off without a hitch. There's too many unpredictable personalities involved, too many complicated logistics, and the bride and the groom, they sometimes have these really grandiose expectations. I mean, wedding guests get lost. At my wedding, my wife and I's wedding, my future mother-in-law was 45 minutes late. She had been in the church a couple of days before for the rehearsal, but she got lost on the day of the wedding. And I'm standing in the back alley the back hallway going, did I just get stood up here or what? She just got lost. It happens. Best men forget the ring. I've been in a few ceremonies. It's like, we get the ring from the best man, and they're like, oh no. Ring bearers and flower girls, if you've ever had those in your wedding, you know they have minds of their own. They kind of do their own thing. Groomsmen faint. Bridesmaids, their heels break and down they go in a pile. I mean, it just happens, right? And that's not even mentioning the weather. One of the things I hear over and over again is people go, yeah, we want to do an outdoor wedding. Which is, I understand that. We live in a beautiful province, but we live in a rainforest, which means it rains a lot. That's how we get big trees and all the green colors and stuff. So imagine my surprise. I always tell couples, make sure you make alternate arrangements because we do live in the wet coast. So imagine my surprise when my youngest daughter, Emily, informs me that, oh, Dad, just by the way, we're doing an outdoor wedding. She was engaged, planning this wedding, and she wanted to do it outside. And I'm like, really? Okay. And she says, no, Dad, it's okay. We've researched it. Jeff and I researched it. We went through the weather almanac, and July 16th is like the driest day in all of summer in BC. It hasn't rained on that day in like 50 years. And so July 16th, it falls on a Saturday, and so that's when we're getting married. And I'm like, okay. Well, July 16th arrived, and it was exactly like January 16th would have been. It was wet, it was windy, it was cold, it was brutal. Day before it was beautiful, day after it was beautiful, not July 16th. As the saying goes, if something can go wrong, it usually does. And that seems especially true when it comes to weddings. And that's what's happening in the story that we're going to look at this morning. This story is found in the fourth book of the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. John was the guy who wrote it. That's why it's named after him. And he was a close follower of Jesus. But even more than that, a lot of scholars think John was like Jesus' best friend. A lot of different reasons for that. But he was right there with Jesus. And so he records all this stuff for us. And here's how this day rolled out. Listen to this. John starts off, he says, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Now, I just want to put some context into when John mentions, on the third day, because there's a lot of speculation around of what John meant exactly when he said the third day. Some scholars believe that John was foreshadowing what Jesus would do after he was crucified, that he would spend 3 days in the grave before he rose again on that first Easter. Okay? That could be. Not saying it's not. Most scholars suggest, and this is where the camp I tend to fall into, is that John is simply, literally referring to the third day. The third day after Jesus kind of came back on the scene and got baptized. We talked about that back in January. because John, after the baptism, says, and the next day, and then he mentions a bunch of stuff that happens, and then he says, and the day after that, my mic is cracking. Okay. And he says the next day, then he comes to this and he says, on the third day, a wedding took place. Okay, so it's just a literal third day. That's all it is. A wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus's mother was there. Her name was Mary, right? And Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. Now, when I'm reading this, I ask the question, why would Jesus, who's on a mission to save the world, why would he be invited to a wedding, and why would he even go? Right? And so I kind of looked into that, and the best I can come up with is this. He was a neighbor. He was simply a neighbor. Cana was a small town located just a few kilometers away from Jesus' hometown of Nazareth. Remember, he's born in Bethlehem. Mary and Joseph live in Nazareth. That's where Jesus grew up. And like the small towns in the prairies, if you grew up in a small town on the prairies, you know how everybody kind of knows everybody's business. They know who's doing what and where and all that type of stuff. It seems like that's what's happening here. These people from these different towns, although they were in different towns, they knew each other really well. And so it's probable that Jesus and his mom knew the families and possibly even the bride and the groom. And so they get invited to this wedding. And the disciples go with Jesus. But here's the thing. Weddings, in their culture, far different from a wedding experience here. Weddings in our culture, they last what? 10, 12 hours? Wedding ceremonies at like 1 in the afternoon. And if you're a real big partier, you last till about 1 in the morning, right? It's about 12 hours. Ceremony is like an hour or less, hopefully less, not more. Then you have that wait between, like you finish the ceremony and then the bride and the groom, they all rush off to get their pictures taken. And you're left standing there with a growling stomach and you're waiting for dinner, right? And then, of course, they're late, fashionably late. But they eventually show up, and that's when the party starts. And again, depending how much of a party you are, it can last anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, right? And then it's all done. That's it. In the Middle Eastern culture, weddings typically are multi-day events. The festivities began much like they do here with a wedding ceremony. Usually took place at the bride's home. And just like here, the bride was the centerpiece of the wedding. Everyone oohed and awed over how she looked and just made a big deal about it. Well, that's when things begin to diverge. Once that ceremony was over, the bride and the groom would leave, and the groom would either, load himself and his bride on top of a camel or a donkey, or they would just simply walk, and the groom would lead them on this procession through the streets of the community, and it would eventually end back at the groom's home. And that's where the party would start. And it was none of this, 6-hour party. These receptions that were hosted by the groom's family lasted as long as 7 days. Like 7 days, you got to take time off work, I guess. And the food and the wine were expected to last just as long. But as we've seen and as we know, weddings don't always go as planned, and this wedding was no different. So they're partying away, and Mary, Jesus' mom, notices something, and so we read this. This is what John says. He says, when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. Now, it's important to note that not only did these parties, like weddings were like a multi-day thing, but in this culture, if you ran out of wine or food before that party was over, it would have been absolutely disastrous. And we're not talking just, embarrassment. We're talking major embarrassment. It would have caused the family to be kind of shrouded in this stigma of shame. The memory of the happy couple would be forever marred by it. they'd be walking, years later, walking down the street, and people would say, oh, yeah, that's so-and-so. They remember that wedding? Yeah, they ran out of wine. Oh, yeah, I remember that one, right? That's what it was like. I was trying to think how we could kind of get our mindset in that. It would be like being at a wedding ceremony. Everybody's there, the pastor's there, the bride and the groom, and then one of them, the bride or the groom, right in the middle of the ceremony says, I don't love you anymore, I don't want to be married, and runs out. I mean, that's the kind of, would be like, what? What is going on here? This was such a social faux pas. And when I first heard this, I was like, really? So I really looked into it. Apparently, there was a law written at the time this wedding took place that if the bride and groom ran out of wine at their party, they could be fined. The religious leaders would come and they would fine them for it. I mean, go figure that. So needless to say, this was a big deal. And so with that in mind, with that background in mind, you can almost hear the concern and worry in Mary's voice as she informs her son that this wedding, this couple are on the brink of disaster. And if you're in a situation like that, who better than Jesus to ask for help, right? Mary knows who Jesus is. She's the one that gave birth to him. When the angel came and said, hey, you're going to give birth to God's son, God in the flesh. You're going to be the mom. So she knows who Jesus is, and she has no doubt that he can fix this problem. And so she says to him, they have no more wine. And you would think Jesus, being the nice guy that he is, would say, oh, thanks, Mom, I'll fix that. But listen to his response. Check this out. He says, woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come. I don't know, maybe you're hearing this for the first time. I've read this story countless times and over the years, and I gotta tell you, every time I read that, I think to myself, wow, what a jerk. Like, how rude. You're talking to your mom, and you're like, woman? Like, what is that all about? I mean, Mary was just simply pointing out a problem. They're running out of wine. That's all she said. It's not like she demanded him, hey, Jesus, can you grab your friends and head down to the liquor store and grab some beer, go on a beer run, bring back some wine, because we're running out here. She just simply stated what the problem was. They're running out of wine. They've run out of wine. And so the question is, why this seemingly disrespectful, rather dismissive response? Well, here's the thing. As it turns out, Jesus wasn't being rude or disrespectful at all. In fact, he was being just the opposite. In that culture, the term woman wasn't used in a derogatory way that we might use it here today when you say to somebody, hey, woman, go do this. It's not the same thing. In the context that it was used here, it was a very endearing term, very respectful and reverent. It would almost be like us addressing somebody and saying, my lady, or madame, or yes, ma'am. It had that tone to it. And this is also a great example of one of the issues that we run into when we try and translate the Bible from its original languages, Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, into English. Those ancient languages, the words that they used conveyed so much more meaning, and there were so many nuances to it that when translators would come across some of these words, they were like, we don't really have an English word that really brings out what they're saying here. This is the closest we have. And so that's the word they'll use. And we can debate, and scholars do, they debate exactly how Jesus' response should be translated and interpreted. But the closest translation seems to be this: my dear mother, your concern and mine are not the same. Now is not the time. My dear mother, your concern and mine are not the same. Now is not the time. And taking that, it helps shed a little bit of light on Jesus' apparent resistance to Mary's request for him to do something. And it also reveals to us that Jesus is showing that he's operating on a different agenda, a different timeline. that he's showing that he's on a mission far different from what people had in mind, even his mom. Most Jews at that time, they were waiting for this Messiah, this long-awaited king that would come in and kick out the reigning government, the oppressive government, which at the time this was written was the Romans. And Jesus had been called the Messiah, so everyone's like, he's the guy that's going to kick Rome out. And Jesus is like, no. You guys are misunderstanding who I am. I'm up to something completely different. I'm up to something so much better than you could even begin to understand. There's an order and a timing to everything I do, including how things are going to roll out and how I am going to reveal myself to the rest of the world. And what I'm out to accomplish. And this day at this wedding in this small town is not the time. I don't know if you've ever experienced something like that where God seems to be operating on a different agenda or timeline than you. You know, even if you're new to this whole God thing, maybe there's been a time in your life where you've gone to God and shared with him your shortage that you're facing. Whatever that shortage is. Maybe you've said something like this, like, God, I don't have enough money. I've got more a month than I've got money. I can't pay the bills. I can't put food on the table. I can't pay the rent. I can't put gas in the car so I can go to work to make money. Or God, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, I am empty. I have nothing left. God, I am out of patience. You know, if you're a mom in COVID, maybe you're praying that right now. But whatever your need, you've taken it to God, but you didn't receive the response in the time or the way that you thought you should get. And it's made you feel like your request has been dismissed or at the very least fallen on deaf ears. Have you ever experienced that? Am I the only one? Well, here's a question. If you have, just think, how did you respond? What was your response? Did you look up at the sky and kind of shake your fist and yell at God and just let him know exactly how you're feeling? How this was proof positive that obviously, you know, you say you love me, but this is proof positive that maybe you don't, or maybe you don't even exist. Man, if you felt that way when you got something going on in your life, some shortage, anything like that, don't feel bad. The Bible is chock full of stories where people shared their disappointment and their doubt about God with God. That's a beautiful thing about the Bible. It's raw, it's real, it's honest. I mean, I've been there. I've had times in my life where I'm out of time. I'm out of solutions. I'm out of ideas. And I've asked God to kind of step in and help. And it's just seeming like crickets. Nothing. Zero. Zip. It's like he's left the building. And I'll just be honest. I've let God know exactly what I feel about that. And if anyone had the right to respond in frustration and anger at Jesus' kind of dismissive attitude and his inaction, his apparent inaction, it would have been Mary, wouldn't it? She could have just easily, and rightfully so, stomped away in a huff, you know, pointing out to Jesus how his response was just proof positive that he didn't care about her, didn't respect her, didn't listen to her. She could have turned to him and said, you know what? After all I have done for you, I have changed your diaper, I made your bed, I made your lunches, I did your laundry, and this is the thanks I get? She could have easily reacted like that. But she doesn't. And the way she reacts is, I think we can learn something from it. Check this out. So after this exchange, Mary, Jesus' mother, said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Just do whatever he tells you. In other words, she's saying, look, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how Jesus is going to take care of this problem, if at all, but I trust him enough that he's going to do something, he's going to do the right thing at the right time. I heard one author put it this way. He said that she trusted that while Jesus, might not do exactly what she asked, he would always do exactly what was right. While Jesus might not do exactly what she asked, he would always do exactly what was right. You see, Mary, in her response, she simply presented the problem to Jesus and trusted that he would take care of it in his time and in his way. And something really cool happened in that. That trust not only caught Jesus' attention, it changed his agenda. Nearby, John writes, stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Back in the Jewish religion, they had a big emphasis on being ceremonial clean on the outside, so they'd have these big jars full of water that they would wash themselves with before meals, before entering the house, after being outside, all that type of stuff. And these jars were empty. There's 6 of them, 30 gallons each. It's 180 gallons, and they're empty, probably because they were used to wash everybody that was at this party. And Jesus said to his servants, fill the jars with water. And remember, Mary just said, do whatever he asks. And so they filled them to the brim. And then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. Now, that might not seem like a big deal to you and I when we read that. But you have to remember, at this point, those servants had no idea that the water had been turned to wine. They just simply filled 6 jars full of water. And they're thinking, we got to take this to our boss? This is not going to end well for us or anybody. They're out of wine, and water ain't going to cut it. But they did so. And the master of the banquet, the master of ceremonies, tasted the water that had been turned to wine. And I love this. He did not realize where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. They're like, whoa, did you see that? There's something about this Jesus guy. And I love this next part. Then he, referring to the master of ceremonies, called the bridegroom aside and said, you know, everyone brings out the choice wine first and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. I don't know, have you ever been to a wedding like that? You know, you show up and it's got really nice bottles on the table, but by the end of the night, it's like you don't have a clue. But he says, you have saved the best till last. Remember, this celebration's been going on for a few days. And most of the wedding guests probably have a pretty good buzz happening, or at the very least, their palates are comfortably numb. They're not really too concerned about what they're drinking as long as that wine glass is full. Cooking wine or wine that comes in a bottle with a screw-on cap from the corner grocery store would have sufficed. Jesus could have made gallons and gallons of cheap stuff, which would have been enough to accomplish the goal of averting the untold embarrassment that would have awaited the newlyweds. But don't miss this. Instead, Jesus goes over the top. Not only does he make top-of-the-line wine, he makes extravagant amounts of it. 180 gallons. Some people have figured that out. It's like over 900 bottles of choice wine. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the miraculous signs through which he revealed his glory. So here's a question. What do you think the miracle was? Here, maybe this is a better way to put it. What do you think was the most impressive thing that happened at the wedding that day? And you would think, it's got to be changing the water to wine, right? Yes, of course, that was impressive. That was a miracle. Absolutely. But what if it wasn't the most impressive thing that happened that day? What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the miraculous signs. What word stands out to you when you read that? Is it the word miraculous? Probably, right? Makes sense. This is a miracle. But let me throw this out for you to consider. What if the bigger word, the more important word, the more impactful word is the word that comes after miraculous? The word signs. Signs point to something, inform you of something. In Jewish culture, miracles, whatever that miracle happened to be, it could be a physical healing, somebody gets their mobility back, or their hearing, or their sight, were really important, okay? But in Jewish religion, it was less about what the miracle was and who it was done for. The emphasis was on who did the miracle, who was behind it. It's like, hey, you see Bob's got his legs back, but did you see who did it? And that's what's happening here. This miracle of turning water into wine, yes, it was a miracle, but it was more of a sign that pointed to who Jesus was, what he's like. And we see that when we read, this was the first of the miraculous signs through which he what? Revealed his glory, what he's like. In other words, this is the moment that Jesus makes a statement of who God is and what he's like. And you may ask, well, what is he like? Well, he's the kind of God that wants to be involved in every aspect of your life, in the big things and the seemingly inconsequential things that we might at the time think are really big. Again, this is the first miracle Jesus did as he kind of walked back onto the pages of history. Remember, he was born, and we don't really read too much about him after that, except for the time his mom and dad lost him when he was about 12. But then he comes back into history, standing at a riverbank to get baptized. And we talked about that back in January. And this is his first miracle. I got to be honest, I'm just keeping this real. If I were Jesus, and I were kind of stepping back into the pages of history to come and save the world, to redeem the world, to restore the world, and I wanted people to know who I was, that I was God in the flesh, I would have done something far flashier, far fancier, and far bigger. Like, I don't know, move a mountain or something like that. Like, move the mountain across, or fly around a room. That'd be pretty cool. Hey, do that at the wedding. Woo, here's who I am. Curing COVID? That would be a good one, right? I certainly wouldn't have restocked a bar at a wedding by changing water into wine in some backwater town where the bride and groom's name aren't even recorded in the Bible. And for me, that's the miracle in this story. That Jesus showed us something beautiful about who he is and what he's like. That he saw two young people who were about to have something that was really, really important to them fall apart. And because it was important to them, it was important to him. That's what this whole Who series is that we're in, that started back in December, is going to take us right through to Easter. Is to kind of rip into Jesus' life and get to know him better than we currently do, in the hopes that as we get to know him better, we can learn to trust him more. Trust him with the everyday things in our lives, not just those big things, but everything. He cares about everything. And I think that's really cool that this comes out in this story. And so I don't know where you find yourself this morning. Maybe you have something going on in your life and feels like you've been praying to a brick wall and there's just nothing happening. I hope this story has encouraged you and helps you to get to know Jesus better. And see that how he saw the needs of a nameless bride and groom at their wedding, and he did something about it. Because that's who he is, and that is what he's like. And so if you've got something going on and you just want to talk to somebody about it, take advantage. We have two awesome people, Jennifer and Guy. Just click the prayer button. They'll answer any questions. If they can't, they'll direct you where you can. But take advantage of that. We're not in this alone. Jesus is with us, and we do this in community. And I am really glad that I get to be a part of that adventure and that journey with you. I invite you to pray with me. God, we just thank you for who you are. And that your life, we get let in on these stories where you interacted with people. And how those truths, even though those stories happened thousands of years ago, the truths, the principles behind them, about who you are, how much you care, and the lengths you are willing to go through to bring us back to yourself are true today as true as they were back then. And so I just thank you that you are so patient with us and you are so willing to just show us yourself and give us exactly what we need, and you'll do it in a way that is far better than we could ever begin to imagine. Help us to trust you in that. Help me to trust you more in that. Thank you for loving us, and we pray this in your awesome name. Amen.